Ben Stein's had a pretty crazy week. Earlier this week, he called Barack Obama the most racist president in American history. But here he has a theory about why
there were presidents who owned slaves.
Nope. He's more racist. For all we know, he owned slaves. Here's his theory for why African Americans in America just aren't doing that well.
You would think if you read the liberal mainstream media, the main problem with race in America was poor innocent black people being set upon and mistreated by the police. That's just nonsense. I mean, the real problem with race in America is a very, very beaten down, pathetic, self-defeating black underclass that is just can't seem to get its way going in the way that blacks were able to before the scourge of drugs and the scourge of gangs. I mean, it's an amazing thing. Blacks were on their way in this country, even after the horrors of slavery. And then drugs came in, the destruction of families came in, and the crisis in the black community is just absolutely unbelievable. And that, it seems to me, is something Mr. Obama could have addressed, and he has ignored it completely.
When were blacks, as a general rule, thriving? I don't remember. When is Ben Stein? What era is Ben Stein talking about?
Immediately after the end of slavery.
So
for 100 years, until drugs.
Right. So what part of the country were they thriving in?
The entire country, it seems like. Does he know that people were doing drugs before the 70s and before the 60s and before the 50s? They were. And look, the reason that we point this out, look, he's a crackpot. He's an author, he's an actor, whatever. He's a pretty crazy guy. But he also was known for a long time as being sort of this trivia master. He knows so much about so much. And here he is, I believe that he knows more than he's implying that he does. He is willfully ignorant about the experience of a massive community in America.
I don't think so.
You don't think that he thinks that they were just fine and unfettered by Jim Crow and government policies that made it harder for them to get housing?
I just don't think I don't think he thinks it through. I mean, this is a guy who year after year after year thinks there is a giant media conspiracy to get Richard Nixon. Consistently, he thinks that Nixon was done in by an aggressive media, by leftist Democrats, and not at one point does this guy, whose name is Ben Stein, listen to Nixon's tapes and think, wow, this guy who I admired, who I gave my career to, is an anti-Semite. And a lot of other things. A paranoid, small, little, bitter man who had such drive in him, such intensity in him, that he overcame all the things that you would think would make someone massively ill-equipped to, let alone be president, but do what you have to do first, run a campaign.
Or be in a service industry.
This guy couldn't have taken phone call, but he achieved so much because there was a greatness to Nixon and a bigness to him. And it's okay to say that while recognizing that ultimately his unquestioned smallness and pettiness and meanness and cruelty and disregard for the law and complete abandonment and disregard for American principles, that all that evidently won in the end. And his bigotry, all that won in the end, and they overcame the greatness that was in him that made him, for a while, overcome those massive detractions. So this is a guy, Ben Stein, who just ignores that. So what he did here was completely ignore it. For crying out loud, until 1947, forget succeeding and getting a job and making enough money to support your family so that they could all go to college and that their families could do better. Everything that every white family has tried to achieve, many of them successfully in this country for years. You couldn't even play fucking baseball if you were black in this country. Okay, you couldn't even go to the major leagues. And Ben Stein, apparently, blacks were thriving at the time when they were left out of the playing fields of baseball and football and basketball. To say nothing of just the idea that maybe you'd make foreman at the plant. So he is so incredibly full of shit, so incredibly dumb, and I like him so much in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Honeymoon in Vegas.
Yeah.
I mean, his Honeymoon in Vegas scene kills. It kills.
I've never seen that.
funny
Ironically, of
movie.
course, Richard Nixon, instrumental in setting up the war on drugs, which has placed a massive number of young minorities in jail for nonviolent drug crimes. And also, look, even if you ignore, which you shouldn't, even if you ignore all of the economic, the institutionalized racism that kept down different minority groups, including African Americans, if you want to just focus on the drugs, whites and blacks use drugs at similar rates, but the actual imprisonment based on that, the negative repercussions of using drugs, that is what is not distributed evenly. Drug use is a universal across the human experience because drugs seem to be pretty fun for a lot of people. But he ignores both sides of that equation, and that's why he comes off looking like a chucklehead.